Mariah had covered his war-torn country for 20 years. He started under the Taliban at a time when there was hardly any media, let alone free media. Restrictions were so tight that you couldn't photograph any living being, person or animal. And he used to go around with a small camera tucked inside a scarf wrapped around his wrist. Mariah came from a family of genetically predisposed, a family that's genetically predisposed to blindness, and his income supported many family members, including 3 disabled brothers and 2 blind children. When he died, his youngest child was just 15 days old, and he left behind 6 children. Towards the end, I believe Mariah expressed a sense of hopelessness about the situation and the violence in Afghanistan, writing, "I have never felt life to have so little prospects, and I don't see a way out. It's a time of anxiety." So before we get to the panel discussion, AFP has put together a short video, so we're just gonna watch that first. Okay, so we're very fortunate today to have 3 AFP journalists with us who came from Kabul to tell us a little bit about what it's like to report in Afghanistan and also to share some of their memories of Mariah. So we have Allison Jackson, who is the Kabul Bureau Chief. We have Emal Haidary, who is a correspondent, and Wakil Kohsar, who is a photographer. So just to get started, I wanted to ask each of you if you could tell the audience a little bit about Mariah. Maybe you have a memory, specific event that speaks to his personality, or you could just give us a sense of the person that he was. I'll let you go ahead, Allison.
So I knew Mariah for 10 months. I joined the Kabul Bureau in August last year, and within a few days, it quickly became very clear that Mariah was very fond of jokes. He loved to make people laugh, and he was very particularly fond of quite dirty jokes. And Emal, so apart from being a wonderful photographer, he was also quite a an entertainer in the office. And Emal actually warned me at lunch one day. I think it was within the first week. He just said, "Just ignore him. Just don't take offence. It's not for you. It's not you." So that was something that was very that really stood out for me. His jokes used to drive me bonkers. I hated them, and I would do anything now to hear another one, because he really did make everybody laugh, and he just got so much pleasure out of it. And I think that's something that I will always remember about Mariah.
Okay, thank you. Emal.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming here. Thank you, AFP and FCC, for organizing this event for our friends who have lost their lives in Afghanistan. I had known Mariah for over 17 years in different capacities, as a friend, as a colleague. He was a great man. He was very hardworking. Of course, he had this very sort of strange sense of humor. And he was a great guy. was a great father for his kids. He was the only breadwinner, the only supporter for his family. Some of whose members had some disabilities. A family that was so poor, he would tell us the stories of how poor they were. They were hardly able to make ends meet, and from very childhood, Mariah had to work and to support the family with his father, who was a taxi driver. He never wanted his kids to have the same kind of life as his. He wanted the best things for his kids, and he was also, in addition to being a very good colleague, he was a good family man for his family, and he would always share stories of his family and kids. He would bring his kids to the office. He was very proud of his sons, and just a week before he was dead, he had a girl, a baby girl, and he brought like 3 names to the office, to colleagues, and he said that he had difficulty choosing between these 3 names, and he was kind of seeking the help of our colleagues to choose a name for her, for this new baby. Well, unfortunately, we have lost him, and I think the only way that we can keep him alive is through this kind of tributes, and through paying tribute to his work. That's what an artist, a journalist, or somebody who works in a hostile environment, hostile place, needs to. And thank you all for coming here.
Thank you. Wakil?
Hello. First of all, Teresa, I want to say thanks for Philippe, and also for Giles is not here, and for Allison. They was in a bad moment. They will support us, and they come and we get a more moral and energy in a bad moment, in a dark day. And what I remember when I met Marai, and it was in 2004. And actually, I started photography from basic, and after I was very young, and after the Taliban collapse, when and I start photography, and I call it Afghan media and French culture. And it was in 2004, and I was for an assignment for working for a magazine, Nouvelle de Kabul. It was a French magazine, just published it in Kabul and Aina. And it was in the first election, and I went in to take pictures and for that magazine, and I met Marai. I saw a guy in a IC election center, and they was take a picture on a bullet boxes, and unfortunately suddenly, and my camera was and it was not working well, but we was just on a training, and I saw a guy tall and so like in a good shape, and he has a really great camera, and the election commission was so far away from the center of Kabul, from the city. It's a kind of 30-minute, or if there's no traffic by car, and on that time, and just I asked from that guy, and can I use your camera and to check it? And he didn't speak to me. Just I was looking like that to him, and he was looking at me, and I took him, and I take up my flash card from camera and put on his camera, and I start just start taking picture. He became so angry. Who are you? And and he said, take my camera and look at them, and then he becomes so angry and shouted me, "Oh, stop, man!" I'm working, I'm busy. And I say, no problem, I know you're busy, and also my camera is not working, just please. And he said, no, just, and then he asked me for who you want to working. I told him I working with Aina and for this kind of magazine, for Novel the Couple. And he says, and he took his cameras and he took off my flash card, and we became a little bit friendly. And after that, yeah, and we meet each other and some press conference, and especially on the attacks side and with the other journalists, and we was so polite. And I was from 2004, 5, 6, 7. I was working freelancer for international and local magazine and newspaper in Afghanistan. And I joined to Movie Media Group in Tulu TV. And until 2014, at the 2014, I joined with AFP, and after that I found Marai, and he was a great. He was a boss of me, and he was a great friend of my my big brother, and we was always in touch and work shoulder to shoulder, and my desk was just kind of not so far away, just we were so close, and every day we meet each other, we make planning for pictures and photos, and it was once I think it was in 2014, he invited all of the colleagues, I think Emal was remember, and with the other colleagues at this house, and we understand who is Marai, and at this his personality and his responsibility at his family, and last year, 2 years back, and he invited us with the Coco Wakil, our driver, and I took some pictures. The picture is also on the wire, and I saw him, how he is at the inside. He has a lot of full of stresses, and he's when he came out from his home, he's so funny guy, and he's with the full of energy, and he was a really talented photographer, and he was and he had 2 young brothers. He was 2 blind brothers with 2 children. Did Alex mention it? And also he was the responsibility of his family he had, and suddenly this is for me, and what I saw, his pictures, and now, and he's not died. He did a lot, but it was not that moment to Mara, to die that, for just for a quick in a second, and that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder if we could just help the audience understand the evolution of the media in Afghanistan real quick before we start talking about the challenges. And we were talking about this last night. It's only very recent that there was a vibrant media before it sort of turned again. And so I wonder if, Allison, you could start and tell us a little bit about that. And then Emal and Wakil, maybe you could explain afterwards sort of how you got into journalism, within that context.
So I think the media is considered one of the success stories of the sort of since 2001. Before 2001, there wasn't the media virtually didn't exist, and certainly wasn't free media, and and we're talking decades, because through the Taliban regime, civil war before that, and then Soviet occupation before that. So after the US-led invasion, then the free media was able to grow and prosper, and it's a very vibrant very active and very energetic sort of media across all the different formats, TV, print, radio, and it's quite well. They're doing investigative journalism. They're exposing corruption. They're putting pressure on the government. They're doing what a media should do, and obviously the foreign media is also there. A much reduced presence from a few years ago. There are very few foreign journalists now in Kabul. Since the drawdown in 2014 or the withdrawal of combat troops, I think the interest in Afghanistan has dwindled, and the security situation has got much worse. So, for those two reasons, the foreign media have pulled out. There's still some agencies, the three major agencies, AFP, Reuters, AP, still there, BBC. AP doesn't have any foreigners there. Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, but even so, they have, in terms of the foreign correspondents, they're coming in and out. So it's, but it's still, it's a very active media.
Emal, can you tell us how you got into journalism and what your experience has been?
I agree with what Allison said. During the Taliban, actually, there was no media. There was a total media blackout. There was only one radio, Taliban state-run radio, and one newspaper. Before that, there was a short period of civil war. Everybody was fighting one another. There was no media at all. And even before that, during the communist regime, there was only one state-run TV, radio, and a couple of newspapers. So basically, before 2001, what we call freedom of expression, freedom of media did not exist. Everything came after 2001. And of course, thanks to hundreds of foreign correspondents, foreign journalists who poured into Afghanistan, which was a closed country. Everybody wanted to know what this country looks like. Everybody wanted to know, to go to every corner of Afghanistan to find untold stories and tell untold stories. That's how I started my career as a journalist. First as a translator with foreign media, and then after like 6 months, I was given some basic trainings of how to report and how to write basic reports. And that's how I started my career as a journalist in 2002. Well, since then, if you ask some people, some like Afghans or countries like Afghanistan, some journalists, they would always say that they wanted to become a voice to their voiceless people. But for me, actually, I kind of feel that the people did not know what that voice meant. They never had that kind of a voice. For decades, actually, they were kind of choked and like a rabbit fed to a snake. It's just that kind of a situation. And then after 2001, like many other things, like telecommunications, like internet, TVs, radios, everything kind of start booming, and people were enjoying. People really felt how powerful the media could be. And then, well, maybe I'll talk about it later. But nowadays, after like 17 years, there are challenges. There are some people who don't like this freedom anymore. It's both the government, the militants, the warlords, militias. So we're kind of challenging all of them. We don't want. Well, the news actually, the news that we run counters their propaganda, of course. And things have changed a lot since then. Maybe I'll talk about it later.
Thank you. Wakil, did you always want to be a photographer? Did you always want to be a photographer?
Yes, of course. This is, that's my career. It's my blood, and that is my society and my generation in the future. They want this necessary. Yeah. And should I tell more about my, how?
How did you get? Yeah. How did you get into it?
Yeah. And as my colleague Emal mentioned it, we are born in a war, actually. And I remember when I was child, and I was listening to the radio with my families on that time, and I remember my father had one radio, and just we was turn it on every day on a 6 p.m. to listening to radio BBC to know about the news, and we all family together, and sometimes and we was and then we was gathering at the village, and there was a place just men and women and youths. They were just gathering to listen the situation of Afghanistan. There was no connection, internet or mobile phone, this kind of things. And on that time I didn't know about photography and this kind of to pictures and photojournalism. And after Taliban collapse, and as I mentioned before, and I start photography in a media center from basic. And I travel all provinces when I start photography, and I did many photo exhibition in Kabul and outside the country as well, and my pictures published in international and local. And from it was a good opportunity, and on that time there was freedom of speech, and it was there was no treat. You can I remember I was just sometimes I was a fixer, like a guide for some photographers, and we shoot together and make a photo story. Like one of my friend, he was working with National Geographic, Alan Bow, and it was in 2003 and 4 we worked together, and we spent one night on the way to Bamyan. There was totally safe with the driver, no security to treat or no. It was just, and like this, it was continued until 2010 and 11, and after, and 2014 when the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan, we feel it a little bit so worse, and the media became under the hit list of the Daesh and militants and Taliban, and also sometimes in a government, and the Ghani is not a good face with the media. And suddenly, now we can see in a bad situation, and especially in journalists and in the media in Afghanistan, they're under the threat. And
yeah, so perfect segue to today. The attack on April 30th was specifically targeting reporters. So how do each of you navigate on a daily basis reporting in an increasingly hostile environment? I'll let you start.
Thank you. It's become very difficult, actually. Afghan journalists in general in Afghanistan are increasingly becoming casualties of war, and they're being targeted. We know that now we are part of the information war that the militants don't like. As I said before, our news actually counters their propaganda.
Now,
So
are you being attacked both by the government and
yeah,
by
mostly
extremists?
by militants because they don't like what we say, but also the government is too busy actually to provide any kind of protection for journalists. So you're left by your organization. Well, people like me who works for international agencies or organizations might be well off. At least we have some equipment or flak jackets and stuff to wear. But there are a lot of, dozens of Afghan media who are financially challenged and they are not able to even buy a couple of flak jackets for the reporters. Yeah, our Afghan journalists are really prone to reprisals and attacks. And because they're reporting the facts, that's why they are being targeted, increasingly being targeted directly. In 1 week, like in April, we lost 11 journalists. It's not only those 9 people who were killed in one attack. Just a day before that, a journalist was attacked in Kandahar and killed, and at the same day, a BBC journalist was killed in Khost. So it's not a coincidence, not like, you just go out and you get stuck in an attack or something. They're all deliberate, and they know who they're targeting. Yeah.
Wakil, what has been your experience, and do you ever think maybe it's time to hold back, not to report on an event because you worry about your own safety?
Actually, for all the safeties, first, safety is so important, and life. But honestly, and I'm super confusing about who is our enemy, who is our, targeting us. And honestly, I really hurt. And in 2014, we lost our great colleague and Sardar Ahmad in a flashy hotel in Sirina Hotel. He killed by his whole family, only on his small child, boys. Abu Zarat, he survived.
This is Sardar Ahmad, who was killed in 2014.
Yes, in March, and he was a senior text reporter, and before that, in 2007 or 8, I think it was Monadi from New York Times. He died in a Kunduz province, and also in 2010, it was, I think, if I'm right, and the Taliban, beheaded Najmal Naqshbandi, and this is the challenges, but we are not stop, especially me, and my camera is a peace gun to show the reality, and this is in my blood.
And for both of your families who are also living and experiencing the violence, do you ever have pressure from them to stop reporting?
Yeah, of course, at times. You know how it works in Afghanistan. Whenever there is a blast, even if they hear the sound of a tire blast somewhere, then the first thing that they do is they call us. It's your mom, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, and everybody, your friends. You get like more than a dozen calls in a minute to check whether you're alive or not, whether you're injured or what. This is the kind of situation that happens to us every day. That's how concerned our families are. Yeah, at times they have asked us to stop. For example, whenever we lose a friend, while talking about some names that Wakil mentioned, all through these 17 years, I've lost more than a dozen friends, like one close friend each year. all my age, all people who started journalism in 2001. Of course, they're worried. Of course, whenever you lose a friend and you bring the news home, they tell you to stop this. But then, if you think for a while, if you're not a journalist, what if you're a doctor or a teacher? They haven't spared doctors, they haven't spared teachers. They have attacked hospitals, they have attacked schools, they have attacked, like, other institutions. So as long as you're in Afghanistan, the risk is there. It's not only being a journalist. Of course, journalists are directly targeted because they're part of this war. They consider them at least part of this war. But also there are other people who are being killed every day in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Allison, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a woman and a foreigner reporting in a conflict zone and in Afghanistan.
Well, as I mentioned, I've been there 10 months, in Afghanistan, foreign women are sort of considered a third gender. The rules that apply to Afghan women don't always apply to a foreign woman. We're almost like a man. So in my experience to date, I haven't felt that being a woman is an impediment in my job. If anything, it's an advantage sometimes because I have access to women, which obviously male reporters don't have. And I can also access to date, I've been able to access men as well and interview men. Of course, there are parts of Afghanistan where that probably wouldn't be possible, but we're also not even able to go to those places anyway. So to be honest, the biggest challenge for me is the security and standing out as a woman. I think foreign men sometimes often have an advantage. They can grow a beard, pop on a shalwar kameez, and they look at least a little bit more Afghan than I ever will. And even if I was to wear a burqa, people would know straight away I walk like a man. They could tell by my ankles. They would know straight away that I was a foreigner. So for me, it's more, the problem is that anywhere I go, I stand out. And that's not a problem for reporting only in the sense that it's a security risk. And I put other people at risk because I draw attention to us.
Do you have a story to share about an incident where it actually worked to your advantage to be a woman?
Well, I had a funny experience. I don't know if it worked to my advantage, but it certainly didn't work to my disadvantage. I went to a city in the north of Afghanistan to interview a governor who the president of Afghanistan had sacked, and he was refusing to stand down, and it had become quite a big political crisis for the president of Afghanistan. And so I went there to interview him. We'd set it up. Anyway, so we got to his compound. I think I was probably the only woman for blocks. There was no women, and he would hold these daily rallies in front of hundreds of men. And I was able to go in. I was the only woman, in a big room full of men. No one cared. If anything, they were quite happy to chat to me, which I think for an Afghan woman that wouldn't happen. And then had to spend the day with this governor who's quite charismatic. I think he quite liked the fact that I was a woman, hanging around. But of course there was no women bathrooms, no female bathrooms. So at some point I had to go to the loo, and I ended up using his bathroom, which had been rumoured to be gold.
And was it?
No, it's just plain old porcelain.
I wonder if we can talk a little bit about how maybe you individually have changed the way you operate since April 30th or in recent years, and whether the Bureau itself has made any changes to security.
So obviously before April 30, we would a photographer and videographer would go to the scene of an attack. There was no sort of science to it. It was just the idea was go there, take the photos, get the video, and get out. because secondary bombs hadn't been a feature of the war like in Iraq, but it had happened. So that was a constant fear. Since April 30, we've stopped that. We don't send video or photo to the scene. We'll go to the hospitals instead. And we also don't take images from our stringers who go to the... It's a rule that we've applied to ourselves and also to our stringers around the country, because it's simply not worth the risk. Some of our competitors have not made that decision, but that has definitely that's been the biggest change. And then periodically we'll have moments. In January there was several major attacks. We had an attack on the Intercontinental Hotel. A week later we had a massive ambulance bomb. And around that time the security warnings that we were receiving were, it was just, the threat level was quite elevated. So we went into lockdown. My French colleague and I, we stayed at home. The guys worked from home. Everyone just reduced movement to bare minimum. And so we periodically do that. I mean, if I sense that, if I feel that the threat level is too high, then I'll just tell everyone stays home tomorrow, which is a very difficult decision to make because an attack could happen at any time, any day. But we do our best to try to reduce. The thing is, being in Afghanistan is a risk. I mean, and you have to accept some level of risk. And we have to operate, and we have to go out and do stories. But there are just times when we have to just stop and stay home.
Is there a sense that everybody within the foreign news media sort of does the same thing, or is there ever kind of competition to maybe push when you're not sure whether the security is sound?
I'm not sure about their policies. I know that since the April 30 attack, that Reuters and AP continue to go to the scenes of attacks. BBC is very, very cautious. They don't go, or they go. It's like hours later. The local media, it's business as usual. They continue to go. In terms of, in general, how they operate, I'm not on a daily basis. I think everyone has sort of different policies. I mean, our policy in the Bureau is if we have an interview, if we're going out we want to go on a mission, you have to do sort of a security assessment. You have to decide, okay, where is it? Where's the interview taking place? Even if we're in Kabul, there are parts of Kabul that we don't go to because they're just considered not safe enough. We would look at the time of day that we were going. We would look at certain days of the week. I mean, we would avoid Shiite areas on a Friday because that's often when a Shiite mosque is attacked. Right. Well, not often, but that's when it will be attacked, is on a Friday. Yeah. Certain festivals we would avoid going out just because the threat level is much higher on those days, that sort of thing. Yeah,
and yet even still you can't avoid sometimes being in the wrong place at the wrong time. You shared a story. I'm wondering if you can share it with the audience about that attack in the hotel in January.
Yeah, my bosses should probably close their ears. So on the day of the Intercontinental attack, on January 22nd, so we had received warnings that hotels were a potential target, and there was a particular hotel that they had named in the security information that we were getting. I made a decision to go to the Intercontinental that day because it was middle of the day. Hotels are very, very quiet at that time of the day. This hotel hadn't been mentioned as a target, and it was to go to a conference, a China-Afghan conference, and the Chinese are very friendly and accessible normally, a little bit difficult in Kabul. But it was just, it was an opportunity to meet the Chinese embassy people, and so I went and was there there for an hour, and then went back to the office. But again, the hotel was completely, it was deserted. And of course, you know, that night, the Taliban attacked the hotel.
And I think
The Taliban, and some of them were already in the hotel. So when I was there, we understand that there were already some of the attackers were checked in, which, you know, was quite a. I mean, at the time it was like we're so busy filing that we sort of like, oh God, that was a close one. And then sort of a few days later, it really sort of hit me that, for me personally, that was the closest I'd ever knowingly come to something, you know, to grief, really. And it was, it was quite upsetting.
Emal and Wakil, do you have close calls that you want to share with us?
Yeah, almost every day for us.
Anyone that sticks out in particular in your mind?
Before that, I just wanted to add something to what Allison said about how we try to avoid actually this kind of incidents or being caught in an attack. We don't know actually. The militants are changing their tactics. Every attack is a new attack actually. They're using ambulances. They're using sticky bombs. They're using different tactics. It's very difficult actually to know what happens next. But what we do is sometimes we work from home. Commuting to office is a challenge sometimes. So we sometimes take public bus or walk. Some of our colleagues have even bought bicycles, actually. They ride bicycles to office. We take different routes every day. We don't take the same road. That's how we try to survive, at least. Close calls. And when was that? Last year, that big truck bomb, the tanker bomb actually that detonated. Yeah, the tanker. It was a tanker full of explosives that detonated in the diplomatic corner of Kabul. I was I was driving in my car. I was like 500 meters from the blast site, and all of a sudden, I don't know if you guys have ever flown a car. My car was lifted off the ground. And at first I didn't know what had happened, and then later on I found that that was the huge blast, which was very close to our office. Our office was partially destroyed. The windows were broken, and for like 2 or 3 weeks we had to work. We had to set on shrapnels on broken windows and glasses to work. We still worked actually. On that day, I was not allowed to go to office like half day, and I had to report on the street. I was on the street. I was stuck there, and I had to talk, which worked out well, but that was a very, very sad incident. To talk to people who were shocked, go to the hospital, while our office was also damaged. We had problem contacting our colleagues inside the office. I called like 10 times. I called my colleagues. None of them were picking up. They were so shocked. I remember I called Dawood, our technician, and he wouldn't recognize. I called him twice, and he wouldn't recognize me. And I was repeatedly trying to tell him that I'm Emal. Are you guys okay? And he was just telling me, who are you? Who are you? What do you want? Because they were shocked. So yeah, we have experienced that a lot, almost every day.
Wakil?
Of course, Wakil might have more interesting stories because they're going to the scene. Photographers are always there.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of memories and bad memories on this kind of conflict. Even not a suicidal attack, and also some in demonstration, as Emal mentioned, in after the truck bomb, and all the and civilians and suicide activists, and they come on the street and they protest, and after that the police they start shoot, they kill them in front of our eyes, and I was escaped and from the area, and also from it was a big demonstration, and it was more than thousands. It was in 2 years back, and it was from the Topi project, and all they start protest from, it's called Kote Sengi, it's from the Shiite Azara area. They march it until kind of 10 kilometers and to call it Demazang, and until there they stop, and all the media was there, and local and international media, and I was with Ratib and Masood, just we were covering and on that time, and Masood was from AP. He was decided to, we should stay and to take more footage, and from the area. On that time, honestly, I feel, it's something happened in here, and just I talked with Ratib, my colleague, and Masood, and I kindly asked them, please leave the area. It's maybe, my feel is say something, it's happened, and just we left the area, and after that, a big and horrible explosion happened at the inside the protest, and the same, and it was in 2010, and we were covering the Ashura ceremony, and after 5 minutes, we left the area, and the explosion happened, and the horrible things that yeah, that was.
There are many.
Yeah, I have many,
Many close calls.
And also, in 2000, it was 2002, and it was a small explosion at the main city in front of the. At the main city, it was a small explosion, and then all the people just crowded, and then after the car bomb explosion, and I was just turned my way. I was so quick. I have come to the office, and I had kind of work, and I saw there was a crowd of the people, and I come behind the building, and then big explosion happened. I saw a lot of people died, with the shrapnel and with the glass of, the windows, and.
Yeah, and then to have to be able to have the composition and to be able to report and ask people questions and find out the facts, it's remarkable. We've spent a lot of time talking about violence and negative, the sort of pessimistic side, but can you, each of you, share a story maybe that's more positive, and also if you feel, the narrative is very negative right now, I think, in Afghanistan, but maybe you can share with us something that's more positive. And then I'm going to open the floor to questions, so if anybody has a question, get ready, please.
The narrative is very negative and very pessimistic, I think, in Afghanistan in general, just because it's dominated by the conflict, and I think that's, for most people outside of Afghanistan, that is their perception of the country, is that it's a country of war and a country where women are oppressed, and both of those things are true. But what we try to do in our day-to-day coverage is also show the other side, or the other aspects of Afghanistan. There are positive, uplifting, inspiring stories there. Emal just did a lovely story about a library bus. This Oxford graduate, this amazing young Afghan woman, has started a bus, filled it with books that were donated, and drives it around Kabul. And any kid, street kids, shoeshine boys, school kids, can get on the bus and read books, because books are in such short supply. Wakil has just done an amazing story about bodybuilders in Afghanistan, in Kabul, which was his idea. Came to me and said, "Oh, Allison, I know about this this really cool gym. This is this old guy. I think he might have been the first bodybuilding champion in Afghanistan back in the 70s or 60s. I mean, and the gym is sort of handmade, essentially. This man had just basically welded, took bits of cars and made dumbbells and all sorts of things. And basically, Wakil worked on this story for quite a long time and compared it to the modern day bodybuilders. And it was a really beautiful story and a real slice of life in Afghanistan. I mean, there are just, when you scratch the surface, I mean, there really are so many stories. I mean, Emal had another, just to mention one more story, Emal did a really fantastic story. I think it's one of my favorites. It's on coffee carts. Came to work one day talking about, I just saw these New York-style coffee carts in the street, and I'm like, that's a story. and it was brilliant. So he went and interviewed all these people drinking coffee in a very much a tea-drinking culture, and it was just a really very touching, very interesting slice of life, and it just goes to show, it's not just about war. It's a country that's functioning, not functioning terribly well, but it's functioning. Kids go to school every day, parents go to work. They're living their life as best they can. So I think it's nice to show the other side of it and the beauty.
I think one of the stories you sent me too was female football spectators, soccer.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic. So the soccer football is very popular in Afghanistan. So but I was quite interested to show the female supporters, because there's a female section in the stands, and so I went with Wakil and Rateb, our video journalist, and we interviewed female football fans who were it was just so much fun, and it was just so wonderful to see these women whistling and standing up and yelling, and they were just so free and unburdened for those 90 minutes from their normal worries, and it was just a really lovely, fun, positive, inspiring story to do.
Thank you. Okay, so if you have a question.
Okay. We had one word.
One more. Okay.
We did that football story actually as a show off to our neighbor in Iran. Everybody liked it.
Does anybody in the audience have a question? Go ahead. Microphone just coming.
Thank you. So I was living in Kabul in 2008, and there were two spontaneous celebrations. One when Afghanistan won its first Olympic medal in wrestling, and the whole country poured out and celebrated, and tribal boundaries seemed to have disappeared. But the other one was less obvious, and that was when Barack Obama won the U.S. election. People poured out onto the streets and were celebrating all over the place. I had not expected to see that. And I imagine that the celebrations were more muted in 2016 for all kinds of reasons. Donald Trump is not Barack Obama, but the whole world has also changed and pulled back, including my own country, Canada. So you're writing for international publication. The world is a lot different from 2008 to now. When you're doing your work, when you look at the world reading what you're doing, I mean, how do you perceive that world? And how does that affect your work?
Sure. That's a good question, actually, and that's a big challenge. We are not only competing with our competitions, we are also competing with a lot of new things, like social media, you have Facebook, Twitter. The world has changed. The people's taste for the news has changed. So we are, in addition to covering breaking news that we have to, we're trying, as Allison said, to find other untold stories. Believe me, Afghanistan, after 17 years, although, whenever you hear Afghanistan, it's about violence, beard, burqas and stuff, but it's also a gold mine of untold stories. There are so many interesting stories that you can go and find. And I think that can change the people's perception about Afghanistan. I'm sure that a bodybuilding story, a coffee cart story, or a library bus story will have a lot of readers internationally. You know, that's how we're doing it. In addition to covering breaking news, whenever we find time, we do other stories. We do people stories and human stories as well.
I think also, just to add, I think the conflict has sort of elevated Afghanistan in terms of the news cycle. So when you do a story, and because the perception about Afghanistan is mostly is associated with conflict, that when you do a story that isn't about conflict and it is something quirky, like a coffee, you know, New York-style coffee cart, or, you know, bodybuilders, or, you know, roses, or something like that, that it really, it gets a lot of attention. And I mean, we're a news agency, we're supplying our clients with stories, and those sorts of stories play really well. There is clearly huge demand.
Thank you. Does anybody else? Florence?
I want to add some that you mentioned from 2008 and celebrate the, you know, on the city, the people, and also just we know, you know, that it is too much. You know, the conflict and war, they publish it from Afghanistan and for the world, and it is very negative. And some, you know, and we have also some make some photo history, and like what I did, make a, you know, like I did young girls, they make
Wushu fighters.
Wushu, and that is so lovely on the picture, and they're young, and it is on a Twitter, it's played a lot on the social media, and I receive a lot of contacts, and they are going to follow them. It was in the last year, and I think, and also in Afghanistan has some beauty and as well, and there is a, you know, a lot of good subject, and we can find it and to show in public for the and outside the country.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so good evening. I'm Florence de Changer. I'm the president of the club and the correspondent for Le Monde. First of all, I really want to say thank you to the three of us for coming here tonight and sharing all this. It's moving, it's important, it's remarkable. So I'm very glad we managed to put this together with AFP. And also it's a chance to repeat our condolences, of course, to the whole community and to AFP and to the Afghan journalists, and also our solidarity, because here in the FCC, yes, we stand for freedom of the press, but we are very privileged, and we don't put our life on the line every day we go to work. So it's a fantastic reminder of what journalism can really be. Since Allison mentioned the sense of jokes that Shamarai had, I would quickly like to share one that we shared when he visited AFP, when I was with AFP in 2008, and we went to this vegetarian restaurant, and someone in the group, I'm sure some AFP people who are here tonight may remember, someone asked to check whether it was a vegetarian restaurant, yes, I said that, whether it was halal. And so the chef came around and said, "Do you really want to know how I killed my cauliflower?" And then everyone burst into laughter, and it remained a joke that we laughed about, you know. Yeah. So anyway, that was just a little joke to remember Shamarai in a nice way. And then, of course, to tonight's debate, basically, I would like to put the question very bluntly. Is it basically a solution to just ignore these attacks? Because they are done to be reported. If the press was ignoring them, would they stop? I guess the answer is no, but I'm still putting the question.
I don't think we can ignore them. I don't think they would stop doing them. I think they're doing them. Obviously, they do. One of the reasons that they do them, particularly in Kabul, is to gain more publicity. But they are also trying to put pressure on the foreign forces, on the Afghan government. So even if we weren't reporting, I don't believe that they would simply stop doing these attacks. And I think it's really important to show the rest of the world. It's important to show the donor countries who are investing money into Afghanistan that and just the wider public that the human suffering, the human cost of this war. If we were to turn away from that, then I think the consequences would be that I think many Afghans feel quite forgotten, and I think that would be. It would lose what attention it does have, basically.
And just technically, in terms of covering photography for the covering of these events, I covered drones recently, and it's incredible how much you can do with drones. Of course, they are used to attack and they are used to send missiles. Are you considering using drones to take
You're not allowed
pictures?
to.
You're not allowed.
It's illegal.
In Afghanistan?
It's a military. I mean, Kabul.
Space.
It's a military
right.
space. So.
I see. Thank you.
Did either of you want to say anything?
Just to add to what Allison said, we do ignore a good amount of attacks, actually, because it's happening, I don't know, up to 4 or 5 people who get killed in an attack. That's not.
Oh, yeah.
That's not
I mean, we have a benchmark, I mean, it's like coal mine disasters in China. I mean, you can't cover every single coal mine disaster, but the bigger the attacks, we certainly cover.
Okay.
I think I remember once, as Allison mentioned it, this is affected for the freedom of speech and media. They wanted to attack. They shout, the voice of the people. And it was, I think, in 2 years back, when the Taliban they attack in a minibus of the employee of the Tolo TV, and they killed and many injured, and some media they boycott it, but it doesn't work it, and for
Okay. Yep. Last question.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the fact that these individuals put their lives on the line for the rest of the world. My question is, do you get pressure from the government of Afghanistan on not reporting issues that are negative to the government of the country?
Yeah, of course. What they do? They simply turn off their phones. They are not accessible. They are not available. If you want to do a story which is against them, a story about corruption, a story about government failure, security and stuff, they don't like it. And as I said before, the government is kind of growing weaker and weaker. They fail to protect journalists. And this new administration, I mean, the top level officials are not very media friendly. So one of the challenges that we face right now is accessing to information from the officials. Even for very simple daily news. But if you're working on a piece which is against them, it's about corruption and stuff, very often they're not either accessible, or even if you catch somebody, they simply lie to you and they don't tell you the truth. That's the kind of pressure that you feel. You have something, you want to say something, but you don't have enough information to say that.
Have you changed any of your stories based on their pressure?
Absolutely not.
No. Actually, we try to find a way around it. Like, if the government is not ready, of course, there's somebody else who will give you the information, which is, of course, against the government. You find somebody else. It's very challenging, actually, to balance the story. But still, no, we have never killed any story because of what the government has.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Thank you. Okay, one more question. We're just cutting into cocktail hour where you can accost all three of them and ask all your questions. So.
Sorry, maybe you're going to address this anyway, but are there any concrete ways that we can help the families of Mirai and the other journalists who were killed?
So we have there's a GoFundMe campaign. So the proceeds from the photos will be divided among the families of all the journalists who were killed that day, of the 9 journalists. We have the foreign and Afghan media in Kabul set up a GoFundMe campaign for the 8 journalists who are working for Afghan media, because they don't have, the Afghan media doesn't have the resources that AFP does. So we're campaigning to raise money for them, and we have AFP also has a separate campaign for Mirai, because obviously Mirai has also been looked after by AFP, but there were a lot of people who were contacting us and asking how they could help. So we also set up a separate fundraising for him. And so we can give you those details.
So just real quick, if you are interested in the GoFundMe, if you just Google GoFundMe, and it's called Support Fallen Afghan Journalists, it'll come up. And I think to date there's about $32,000 raised, which is not a lot for 8 families. So certainly encourage everyone to contribute. On that note, we'll conclude. Thank you, all 3 of you, for being here and for traveling quite a long distance and for sharing your experience. We just have a small gift for each of you. I think it's probably pretty obvious what this is. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.